Good morning, Ludwig.
Good morning.
So I'm so excited to share you with all my friends out there. When I first met you at Rancho La Puerta, I was nervous because I knew you had a PhD in philosophy. You were studying the professor Edmund Zeke, who founded the ranch, and I knew you had written many books. And I thought to myself, oh, he's sitting next to an astrologer. He's probably going to poo-poo everything that I think and do, but it wasn't the case at all. So can we start off by just talking about our initial conversation and how you came to be open to things like astrology, considering your much more philosophical, scientific background?
Well, first of all, astrology itself has a long history of being highly respected and used to be taught at universities. So it is a modern attitude, basically, that couldn't fit this particular science, and it is a science, actually, that relates cosmic events to human events, that it just didn't fit into the modernist ideology. So we discarded it, like with some other experiential sciences or the wisdom of other culture, like traditional Chinese medicine. Are there meridians? Are there not? Well, a lot of people, that means over 1 billion people for 5,000 years, felt there were, and there are. So we always have to be very careful what we dismiss. But you're right that I grew up with a particular academic, analytical, critical, rational, materialistic, mechanistic way of thinking. And that got me an advanced, and I don't really like that word, but it got me a terminal degree.
Sure, I like that.
There are sort of, as a terminal disease, there's a terminal, but there's such a thing as a terminal degree. So I was very, see, things are even shaking when I say that. Because I don't have this computer on a very, very stable table at the moment. So anyway, I was very eager to advance in that particular paradigm of thinking. But when I was I was teaching at the University of California, Southern California, and then University of California in Riverside. At one point, my paradigm fell apart. And I think often through events, personal events, but I think also collectively sometimes we get a shock.
Like what we're going through right now, it's very similar.
That's right. And we go into a state of fear. But we could consider that these shocks, when things that used to work, they don't work. And they suddenly often don't work anymore. And what are we going to do now? Then we have to give up our paradigms of certainty, because all these constructed certainties, whether there is the medieval certainty about a certain, religious conviction, or whether it is the scientific certainty, there are things simply happening in nature and in the world beyond what we can directly perceive with our senses. We're subject to them, and we will have to deal with it, with that change. And we can either go into fear or we can go into creativity. The Chinese sign for crisis, if we say that we're in a crisis, we are, is also the same as for opportunity. So I think right away, I'd like to say that when I was thrown into a crisis because I ended up with having some physical stomach pains for a long time, and all my readings and studying and consulting with the expert, it just didn't work. So then actually I opened up to the Chinese traditional medicine, and that helped me a great deal. And then I thought, well, maybe my way of thinking, which I knew was so superior to everybody else's way of thinking, particularly to everything that was previously held by, and here comes, I have to right away actually say something about the Professor Edmund. That it was one of his key insights that is so incredibly valuable when he says, Yeah, we're advancing very fast in the 20th century, but what did we leave behind? And whom did we leave behind? And then it's one of his key earliest teachings where he says, there are treasures, there are gems, there are incredibly valuable lessons that those societies that we have dismissed or devalued as inferior or behind or not developed enough. Because of course we are the ones, in the West that are the super developed ones. And, but let's look at that again. So wherever he goes, I do think that trip to Haiti was important for him when he saw, just like Weston Price, the Ohio dentist, when he goes to the various places, when he says, how come these primitive, in quotation marks, natives, how come they are so healthy? How come they actually don't need a dentist? So, not that they didn't have their own issues and problems that were blessings from the West were very useful for them, but there is a balance between an understanding and awareness that I call him Edmund, the professor, called for. He says, what is it that we actually need to recapture, that we need to unearth again? And he founded a whole discipline called archaeosophy, which is a combination of archaeology and philosophy. So my conversion, I would say, to a more open mind was forced. And I do think that happens to a lot of people.
So it's happening right now with the pandemic. It's one reason I wanted to talk with you, because you've talked about how we've been living in a horizontal framework and we're shifting into the vertical. Can you explain that? Because it's similar to what you went through personally, and you became open to esoteric things.
Yeah, so we spread usually in our thinking, our intentions horizontally. And usually it's a drive for power, which is a very natural drive. But then we don't have often the insight or the understanding that our intentions that we have and our desires that drive our motivations, they're often filled with unconscious fears, with fears that put us on kind of a linear track. They put us in this track of linear thinking, where we just move and expand in this particular way of linear thinking. It's usually, our highly developed, in the West, rational, analytical, critical perspective. And then if we dismiss everything that doesn't fit in there as esoteric, as weird, as woo-woo, whatever it might be, then I would say, from Edmund's point of view, we're missing out on a huge amount, a treasure of wisdom, a treasure of understanding of other cultures earlier, and even today, where people have cultivated these kinds of disciplines that have been falling under the category of, not valuable for our times. So that, and when I talk about the vertical dimension, I'm able to talk to you in Florida, and that's wonderful that we can do that. That's great progress. But there's also a reduction in the way we talk right now. We have lost something. There's an energetic presence. There is a reduction into two dimensions. When Jerry Mander writes and talks about in his 4 arguments for the elimination of television, or Theodore Roszak talks about the cult of information, and I have a 2-dimensional picture of you, but that isn't you, and you don't see me. There's Jerry Mander talks about that television or this visual media that can reach so far and so fast in the horizontal level, but it is a reduction of the sensory experience. And what is left out here, is it important? So, and what is left out and what is, or is devalued or doesn't receive the necessary attention is what I call the vertical axis that the human being lives in. So Edmund's first big book, a very important book, called Cosmos, Man and Society. You know, the first word is cosmos in that book. So the influences that come to us from the cosmos as the various energetic influences. And so those are the vibrations that come, the influence of the moon. We are aware of some of that. We are aware, certainly, there's no life without the sun. But, you know, essentially, we're replacing it at the moment in the last few decades with another screen of satellites that actually is now something that we rely upon. Now, it was Tesla, who was quite a great mind, I would say, who said that if you understand...
I think your screen just went dead.
So Cosmos, Man and Society. So I think in all of his writing, the professor invites us to look at the larger perspective and look at the influences, those that we have neglected through a certain, what I would call a Western arrogance and a Western superiority, a sense of that we are above nature and we do not have to really look for what is the context of our actions. How does it affect the whole natural world over the long run? And then it was really not by coincidence that he selected a place in Tecate, Mexico, where the proximity of nature, or actually to be in the middle of a natural environment, was crucial for his thinking. And by the way, that Mount Kuchuma is considered by the mythologist Evans Wentz one of the seven sacred mountains. So the sense of sacredness, of that we live really in a sacred environment, and we are participants in that, very much sort of in the sense of, you know, the way Native Americans like Chief Seattle talks about it. So we need to look at much more in the vertical sense. Have we forgotten of how the whole universe really is present? And what about the Earth? In the vertical axis, we pretty much identified in the sciences that developed out of a certain thinking in the 17th and 18th century, that, you know, as long as we have the power, we do with the Earth whatever we want. It is a dead natural resource, or if there's something alive there, it's still, we can do with it whatever we want. And we have actually realized, at least some people have, in the 20th century, with the environmental movement, that the damage that we do to the Earth does come back to us. And it does come back in form of diseases very often. And we think we had this great triumph of, let's say, the antibiotics. And they were very helpful, and they still are very helpful, except there is what I call, what we usually call the side effects is actually turning out to be the main effect. Mm. So the main effect being is that what are we doing to our immune system, for example, with these antibiotics? So it turns out that only more recently we figured out that it really destroys a lot of the beneficial bacteria, the beneficial microorganisms. You know, I'm very happy about the many inspirations for the mind that the ranch offers. Because, you know, if you go one of the great lectures of Joe Weiss, medical doctor, the way he talks about the gut microbiome, it's fascinating. You know, we are actually much more of a creature of these microbial cohabitants in our body than our, what we consider our distinctly human cells. So, and if we disturb these balances, we pay for it. It doesn't mean that we should give up now all of these Western sciences and all of these allopathic ways of dealing with health. It doesn't mean that at all. It's not like a, you know, we have to do a total Rousseauan back to nature. But we also have to realize, when are we really going forward? We're not going forward if we have a leap in an advancement in our intentions and then basically harvest a few decades later or even sooner a tremendous wave of destruction that really affects our health in a very dramatic way. And here we come, I think, to a very important point. When Edmund says that healthy soil produces healthy people, for decades we thought we could do with the soil whatever we want to in order to grow whatever we want to. And then we had a tremendous quantitative success. But Edmund very early told us, 25 years before Rachel Carson publishes her book, Silent Spring, wait a minute, don't you see the qualitative loss? Don't you see that the uptake of minerals, of various nutrients, micronutrients that the plant does under these circumstances of lack of biodiversity and chemical, what's happening in chemical agriculture, is over the long run a disaster. And what is it a disaster especially for? It's a disaster for the immune system. Now, I would like to give you a quote from Edmund. Actually, you know, I have made a collection over the years of over 200 quotes from the professor. And for our talk, I selected only 24. I hope I get to one of them. But it is a very interesting one, because as we're dealing with a health challenge collectively, is war the only option that we have? And Edmund always warned against conducting wars against something that we dislike, that we don't want. Very often, of course, if you look at more from a Jungian perspective, it may be our shadow that is catching up with us. Now, here he talks about cosmotherapy. And I want to give you right now the 3 most secret remedies that Edmund has. Now, you will laugh when you hear them, because it's not a particular drug or a particular remedy or herb. He says the most important powerful healing agents are, and he relied on them, sun, air, and water. Sun, air, and water. So, and now, of course, we realized, again, decades later, after Edmund said it, well, you know, these days, a lot of people say, take your vitamin D. Well, yeah, it's important that you take vitamin D, but there's another way of getting it. How about if you have more exposure to natural light? Natural light has a profound effect. And so we have a lot of things that, at the ranch, that are geared for us to spending times outdoors and getting closer to nature. I want to mention another way where I think that the ranch, which I see as actually an oasis of sanity, and an oasis, and there are others, as a consequence, other places that actually in many ways are imitations of the ranch, where to experience directly through all of our senses, through our physical senses, but also the effect that being in nature has on harmonizing our mind and calming our emotions. So we are in a natural environment which in and of itself is healing and therapeutic, if we minimally or only consciously disturb that initial harmony. But when we think we are masters of that nature, that we can do with it whatever we want, that we usually create a great piece of progress very fast. And after that comes the long regret, because we didn't look at the consequences. So what his way of looking at what creates vitality, health, long-term vitality and longevity He called it cosmotherapy. So you do let the sun in. You do let the air in, lots of breathing exercises. Then, and you work with the water. Can be in a very sophisticated way, and developed in modern times. I'm thinking now of all those water exercises that we have in all of these pools, including something very recent, the Watsu. So those are all ways you work with the elements, not against them. You do work against them in cases of emergency. And then we're very grateful for all these respirators and all these wonderful tools that we have in intensive care. But it doesn't mean that we are not aware of what have we done that over the long run is disturbing these natural supporting harmonies. So let me give you, it's about a 10-line quote.
Okay, good.
Directly from Bettman. Cosmotherapy gets rid of disease simply by strengthening the vitality of the organism and not by attacking the disease. Strengthening the vitality. Often Edmund says, don't fight, don't think evil is something that eventually you can defeat forever as a permanent solution. No, there is a way where we will, or we are actually simply in this biological life with adversity, with things that are inconvenient and are dangerous to us, and natural agents. We need to know which mushrooms are poisonous and which ones are actually very good for our immunity. So then he says, similarly, it ends ignorance by extending education and not by violent attacks on ignorance. So we have a long history in the West of declaring people who are thinking in different ways as evil. And for centuries we burned these people at the stake. So anyway, it fights egotism with altruism, not with selfishness. It gets rid of misery by the progressive elimination of the chief individual and social causes of misery, by giving everyone progressively the possibility of gaining and extending individual and collective well-being, not by violent attack on the existing laws of society. Edmund is not a revolutionary. He doesn't get stuck in protest. Let's now, fight and kill and eliminate whoever then we find as the enemy. So, in short, the movement, that movement of cosmotherapy, seeks to create a better future by the constructive amelioration of the present and not by the destruction of the past. A lot of what we call modern in the 20th century and the 21st, it's a devaluation actually and destruction of ancient wisdom and wisdom of people who have different access to knowledge. It brings about a peaceful inner revolution, an inner revolution, rebirth of the individual with the aim of ensuring the unlimited progressive education of men for citizenship in a constantly improving and developing society. So there is a gradual agenda that he has, and it's an inclusive agenda. And inclusive meaning here, well, we have made progress in overcoming or working on overcoming racism. We are working on the devaluation of the feminine. So we have a number of things in place, or I would say in process, probably better to say. But eventually we have to admit, we're still a very aggressive Western, colonially oriented, imperialistically inclined kind of a society that has imposed its own paradigm on the rest of the world. And has it worked for us? Will it work? And I believe that we have an opportunity when there is a challenge to the way we work with nature to revise and make our agendas more open towards what is nature teaching us. You know, when you go on a walk around the ranch with Rob Larson, I remember walking. I mean, it's amazing what he sees and what he tells the people. We just run by. You know, we run from the dining room to the place where we have our Wi-Fi. and then we of course, we want to be in touch with the world. Oh, yeah, of course, we could miss out. But what are we really missing out? I remember at one point, you know, you pointed upward and there was an owl right in the, you know, quite well hidden, but I mean, if you paid attention, you could see, and there are so many miracles, and these miracles inform us. That's another kind of information, and that changes our way of approaching nature by letting us being approached by nature. So, and then there's the whole aesthetic dimension at the ranch. When you look at the sculptures, when you look at the meticulous landscape architecture or design, that of course, you know, points right away to the visionary Sarah Olivia Brightwood-Seki, who has an advanced degree in landscape architecture. So this is all food for the soul, and it's food for it's balm for the spirit. And through these inspirations that we get by giving attention to the way nature is arranged. It is not wilderness as a sense of you leave everything alone. It is a conscious, careful, caring attention given to nature. And then it turns out that research does show it has a profound effect on the immune system. Now there is this book by a Japanese author called Forest Bathing. You might have heard of it, forest bathing. Well, it turns out that what's going on measurably by science in the liver, in the organism, is positively affected if you go for a long walk in the woods. Or, for example, if you do a meditative walk around that oak grove where the labyrinth is at the ranch, and you spend some contemplative time there, so you can get out of that busy treadmill, that gerbil wheel of constant efficiency and of being basically a slave of your own desires and fears. It gets you in that Goethean mood more, where instead of just saying, what can I get from nature at this point? How quickly can I exploit it for my purposes, for my immediate gain? You get more of it. What is it giving to me? And it's actually giving plenty. There is actually a tremendous amount of abundance that is bestowed of us. And this argument that, you know, do you want a lot of people be hungry by moving more towards an organic agriculture? And here again, of course, the ranch has been leading for decades about the density of nutrients. Now we have people like who were guests at the ranch, like Joel Fuhrman, that the nutrient density and the quality of nutrients. And Edmund said in the 1930s, you know, an orange not necessarily is the same as an orange. You think just an orange, we have figured out how much vitamins and minerals are in an orange. He said, it all depends. Where did it grow? How long was it stored? What was the soil like? There are many qualitative factors that we very often have ignored in that quantitatively oriented, exclusively economically driven kind of agriculture, which then really weakens our body. So to restore the vitality, to restore the immunity by an increased exposure to nature, by letting the sun, air, and water work on you. And there, of course, he's very strongly influenced by the water naturopathic doctors like Sebastian Kneipp and Priesnitz, and by the sun doctor, and these various, 18th and 19th century counter movements, but we also have them in the 20th century. All of that is saying in one sentence, be careful when you think of nature as the enemy. Be careful what you do to it, and use it as a resource, but use it with a contextual awareness and a long-term perspective. And I do think so many people, by being at the ranch, how it deals with its own ecological situation, what it does with water, also the kind of water you drink there, or what we do there in terms of the various workshops that bring us back into our body and allow us and encourage us to interact more directly with nature in order to have an increased sensory experience, which then translates into an increased vitality and into an increased immunity. So that immunity is not like, let's have the biggest fence between us and nature, but it means that we are cautiously and consciously and actively, with all of our modern tools, interacting with nature, instead of just kind of treating it as a, something inferior to us, something that we will, we have to train to obey our will. There's way too much happening in nature today, and will be probably for a very long time, that we don't have a clue.
Right.
And there is actually a quote that I have with which I might want to all right, I have to. The human organism is nothing else than a single and dynamic system of Cosmo vital radiations in which each cell has a specific radiation, the totality of which constitutes the human radiations. The human organism is simply an apparatus of great precision, prepared in the perfect laboratory of nature. We have replaced the laboratory of nature with the laboratory in nature, where the first thing you do is you sort of, in biology, and when you study biology, first you kill the cat, and then you paint the veins blue and the arteries red, or you cut the tree and then you put it in the lab. It serves to maintain an equilibrium and harmony between the human radiations and all other forms of cosmic radiation surrounding it. Cosmic, solar, terrestrial, and human. So we forgot about a lot of these other radiations, call them energies, call them influences. This harmonious equilibrium between the eternal human radiations and the external cosmic radiations is human vitality. And its manifestation is health.
Beautiful.
So that's month. That's 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and of course alive as a practice, as an opportunity at the ranch today. That's what is being cultivated there. And although at this very moment, we cannot be physically at the ranch because of the social circumstances, the collective imperative at this very moment. You know, at the end, Friday afternoon, there's always a wonderful program called How to Take the Ranch Home. So, and I often think, you know, after a month or two after I've been at the ranch, how much of it sort of did I still leave there actually in terms of my own eating habits, in my own exercise habits. So somehow that encouragement and that inspiration often kind of, I wouldn't say that it fades in me, but it gets reduced by other very extremely immediately important things that I have to rush to. So I think this necessary and involuntary break at this moment, maybe we can use it as an opportunity to reconnect in what was it when I was there at the ranch that I did differently? What was it differently in terms of what I ate there in quality and in quantity? What was it different in my interaction? You know, there's such a wonderful way to meet great people at the place. And so it is this involuntary isolation at the moment for many people, I would say, to really actively simply connect in our mind and then in our actions to what is it that the ranch has promoted, has cultivated in the last 80 years through the guidance of the spirit of Edmund and through the direct and practical guidance of Deborah and the next generation, Sarah Livia. So we don't have to be away from it, really. We can reconnect. And then next time, when we're eager, of course, to get back there, we can say, well, that break actually, I use it as a reminder. I use it as an opportunity to adjust my lifestyle a little bit more to vitality enhancing, immunity strengthening way of living.
Do you have any final suggestions for people who are psychologically just having a really tough time with the isolation that this virus, this pandemic is causing?
Oh, yes. You know, we only covered 2 quotes, right? We have only 221 to go.
We have to talk again. But for today, what's your thought to help somebody struggling with that?
My thought is, I think it's important to do all of these publicly advocated measures, you know, that you wash your hands frequently and all of these things, that you know, where the social distancing, all of these things. But I think there's something else where I think Edmund at the ranch is extremely helpful, because there's one great danger that actually you just mentioned, to get stuck in fear and panic and to leave that television running for all the hours that you're awake. And then you see these dramatic pictures and then you build up the fear. And fear is a very, very strong immune suppressant. We do know that. That's scientifically verified. So what else is really done at the ranch? And what is Edmund advocating? Well, he says we should spend regularly time to celebrate and to listen to and watch the great masterpieces of universal culture. I think this is a great time to read Shakespeare again.
Oh, yeah.
Read Dante, or to read, you know, the classical, those real nourishing and insightful great masterpieces, or to listen to the symphonies of Beethoven, or to, you know, when you're at the ranch, you know, I mean that some people who see that video probably remember me talking at the ranch, or I mean that film, The Tree of Life,
yeah,
that's shown at the ranch. And so in that film, there's a segment where you see a cellist and a violinist. So we have this wonderful celebration of classical music, the kind of music that doesn't cause a lot of enervation, a lot of irritation, like a lot of the entertainment and what we watch is actually quite, exposes our eyes and ears to a lot of violence and a lot of visual shocks. And I think that those balanced harmonies, as we can find them in different cultures, to spend some time right now to listen to some great music, to watch some great films. Actually, there are great masterpieces. So the masterpieces of universal culture as our regular mental diet, as our diet for where the nutrients for the eyes and for our ears are playing a crucial role as a way of moving beyond fear, moving beyond the hysterical and total fixation of our mind. So don't hide from the world, watch these news or listen to the news, but not whatever the hours that you're awake.
Right.
In once a day, once, maybe you need it twice a day. But otherwise, then read a great book, listen to a great piece of classical music, watch a classic film, and then, or watch some funny movies, actually, I think. I know the case of I think it was Mormon cousins who was very, very ill. And at one point, he just asked the hospital to give him a whole, dozens and dozens of funny movies. And humor is actually a very powerful immune strengthener and health strengthener. And actually, he recovered. So it is a time not to get lost in fear or melancholy or depression, because that's looming. And that comes because we lock into a collective energy that it just wants to get rid of this problem instantly. And if it doesn't, it gets into this negative, angry, rageful state. So to cultivate those possibilities that we have, even, or is maybe especially if we are in this involuntary time of isolation, to let us let us go closer to what we have as food for the mind, food for the soul and for the spirit. And then, of course, what we eat these days, food for the body. In all of these cases, I would say the work of the visionary Edmund Seike is still, for the 20th century and for the 21st century, even more, a real guiding way to deal with our experience. I want to finish just with one sentence by Edmund that is also at the end of that video that you can see. I think it's also online, that video. You can get it, Tree of Life. So it says, the ideal is to harmonize civilization and nature. We haven't really done that. I think that will be of great help. And to connect with the forgotten wisdom of ancient times, or the wisdom of today's wisdom as it's carried by indigenous cultures, and then to celebrate the great masterpieces of art.
So there's a lot of things there.
We won't have time for depression or for being scared.
Yeah. You'll be too busy listening to music, reading great books, and eating good food.
Yeah.
So
it will build a certain self-confidence, and it will build immunity as well.
yeah, it can shift your vibration and shift your soul and your spirit. And I think that, as I told you the other day when we talked, that people need to hear more from wayfarers, wayfinders, people like Edmund, and you carrying on with his studies and sharing what he was there to talk about many years ago. But it's so pertinent right now. I can't thank you enough for doing this with me, and I hope we can do it again. I think you have a lot more to teach us. So we're good for another one someday?
Sure. Yeah, sure. As long as you want to hear what I...
Oh my God, absolutely. I think we're just touching the surface of what you have to share. But I thank you, and all the people who missed the ranch. We just know we'll be back there again and appreciate it even more when we get back.
And in the meantime, we will adjust and cultivate what we've learned at the ranch.
Yeah, and do it, like you say, take the ranch home.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ludwig. We'll talk soon.
My pleasure, Leslie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.